Good morning, LCC kids. Happy Sunday. Happy New Year. We're jumping right back into our lesson video for today. We have some in-person classes happening on Sundays, and so some of you can be with us, maybe if you're second grade on down, but if you can't be with us in person, you can still check out some of these videos as well every Sunday. So we're going to jump in with our game for today. I trust that you're at home watching this. We're going to play a game called Home Hunt. And here's how it's going to work. I'm going to say an object that can be found in your home. You got to run and go get it carefully. And you got to bring it back to your screen in under 15 seconds. You think you can do that? Maybe you need to pause the video if you're not quite ready. Well, here we go. I want you to bring me in 15 seconds a bottle of ketchup. Let's go. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How'd you do? Got a side of ketchup to go with whatever we're serving up today at LCC Kids? If so, you won the Home Hunt Challenge for round 1. We'll come back and do another challenge in just a little bit. We're going to jump into today's lesson. We're talking about the temple. And temples, people don't tend to talk about temples these days. It feels like something from the ancient world. But we'll find out that God still has a temple. But we're jumping back into the story of David. We've been learning about how God called David to be king, how he faced off with a giant named Goliath. We've heard about how David was a songwriter. He wrote these songs called the Psalms. He was a worshiper. Something else that David did that was really important is that he had a desire to build a house for God. All of these years, God had been setting up a tent called the tabernacle. And Israel, they were on their way. They were wandering through the wilderness. And they would set up their tents. And right in the middle would be God's tent. God would live among his people. Now, God is everywhere. No space can contain him. But he would bring his special presence and care to his people in a place called the tabernacle. It was in the tabernacle where they would do the sacrifices to make atonement for the people's sins. And David said, God, we're in the promised land, and we have our own homes right here. We're not living in tents anymore. Why is God still living in a tent? I want to build a home. I want to build a house for God. And God said, David, you think that you can build me a house? Well, guess what? I'm going to make you a house. Because back in the old days, a house was another word for somebody's lineage. And David would have a line of kings that would come after him, his sons and grandsons and great-grandsons. And God promised David, there will always be on the throne one of your sons. Ultimately, he was talking about the Lord Jesus Christ. But it was a good thing that David desired to build a house for God. But because David, so much of his life and so much of his reign involved warfare and fighting, because Israel had a lot of enemies, God said, it's not going to be your job to build this house. You can come up with the plans, but this house, this temple is going to be for a time of peace. And so it was David's son Solomon who actually built the temple and oversaw its construction. But what David did is he took up an offering from the people. God's people gave. They gave generously toward this. In fact, they collected so much gold. There was about 66 elephants in weight of gold. If you imagine taking 66 elephants and sticking them on a scale, that's how much gold was collected and was donated for the temple. And if you had like 138 elephants of silver. And so people who, they weren't rich, but they loved God. And they wanted God to have a place of worship and a place of honor right in the middle of their nation. They gave toward building the temple. And when Solomon dedicated the temple, it said that God's glory, the glory cloud of God's presence, filled the temple. God would be among his people. There was a house for God right there in Jerusalem. And we're going to hear about what else the temple points to in just a minute. But let's do another home hunt challenge. Are you ready for this one? You got your running shoes laced up and tied tight. Now, be careful navigating your house. Don't knock over your parents, please. All right, here we go. You have 15 seconds to bring me a refrigerator magnet. All right, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bam! Maybe you still had some like Christmas card refrigerator magnets on your fridge. Maybe you got one of those. Maybe it was something else. But if you did it in 15 seconds, you win the home hunt challenge. Now, David had a heart to make a house for God. But God ultimately wanted a home for God's people. And you know the temple that David built and that Solomon built, it ended up getting destroyed. And they built another temple, but that one got destroyed as well. The temple of God would no longer be a building with physical bricks. I've got some bricks stacked up behind me here, right? That's no longer God's temple. The people of God are described as being a temple. In fact, God himself came among us. We just celebrated this around Christmas time. Jesus was the presence of God. Jesus was a temple who came to be among us. And he said, destroy the temple, and in 3 days I'll build it back up again. People scratched their heads. They didn't know what he was talking about. He's talking about himself. If he would die in 3 days, he would rise because he was God's presence. But the church of God is like a temple. God lives among his people. When we gather for worship on Sunday, we're the temple of God coming together. God is in our midst. His glory fills the place where we gather. And you know what else? One day, all of the world, all of the universe will be the temple of God. The new heavens and the new earth are described in the book of Revelation as being this amazing cosmic temple where God dwells and where we will have a home forever. Right now, we might not be wandering around in the wilderness, setting up a tent like Israel did. But a lot of life feels like that. Like we're not at our forever home yet. We're not. We're still wandering around. We still live in a place that feels like a wilderness. But one day God will make everything new, and we will live in his presence and live in his joy. And forever we will be at home. And that's what the story of the temple points to. We'll keep learning some of these stories from the Old Testament. See you next Sunday.